I've got an entity here with me today. Just turned up about 10 minutes ago, making me feel a bit strange, a bit breathless. But it's Krishnamurti, and I don't know why he's here, but maybe because we're doing reincarnation. So if anyone, hopefully he'll go and visit you guys at some point during the lesson, and leave me alone a bit because when he comes close, it's quite strong. Krishnamurti. He was a spiritual teacher in the 20th century, and we've got a long history with him as part of our soul group. But he became self-realized in the 20th century. He died in 86, I think. Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, this usually happens when they want to give a message of some kind. They want to say something, and you're not quite getting it, and they come closer and closer. And when they come closer and closer, their energy gets strong. You can feel their energy stronger and stronger. Starts really affecting you. Get breathless. Big weight that feels on your chest. Your hearts can start beating, and all sorts of. So hopefully he can go and see one of you guys so that I can get on with presenting the lesson. I feel that he wants to say something through somebody else anyway. Maybe he'll come to. That's what I need. In fact, that's what I needed to say. He's going to come and see somebody else, and say something through somebody else, or give somebody else a message. Right, off you go. Yeah, maybe you, Sally. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Hopefully you can see that and shout if you can't. So it's lesson 11, reincarnation, part 2. So last lesson, that was reincarnation part 1. We talked about the basics of reincarnation, i.e. how it can actually work in terms of anatomy and physiology. So we talked about what the soul is made of, malleable magnetic energy. We talked about how reincarnation could have started to evolve millions of years ago in terms of spreading genetics about and spreading emotional memory about, which is what karma emotion is. And we talked about mitochondria, and we talked about how the higher mind can, or the soul can actually impact the material body genetics through the mitochondrial DNA, the insertion of a higher mind signature into mitochondrial DNA, and how the mitochondrial DNA is passed down the maternal line. Now we'll come back to that. If we have time at the end of this lesson, we can come back to that. Or there is a whole lesson on the science of the reincarnation project. So today it's reincarnation part 2. So it's a completely different aspect of reincarnation we're going to talk about today, and that is the spiritual evolution aspect of reincarnation. Spiritual evolution, the journey of spiritual development, the journey of spiritual evolution, the journey of the universe. And you could liken it to a long and winding road with a distant goal in sight. So let's talk about spiritual evolution. And let's start with the question of what is it? What is spiritual evolution? Well, before we talk about reincarnation, we should talk about spiritual evolution in a wider context, in the context of the whole universe, because reincarnation is a part of spiritual evolution. It's a part of spiritual evolution on this planet. It's a part of spiritual evolution in animals on this planet. But spiritual evolution itself is much bigger. You can take it all the way to the whole universe, really. So let's start at the source of the universe. The source of the universe, when it creates the universe of form, the physical universe of form, it creates it with a separation to it. A separation into two. And we talked about this in lesson 2, didn't we? Duality, the creation of form. The universe creates positive and negative energy, and that positive and negative energy interacts with itself and makes form and structures, and that gets replicated all the way through the universe. And that duality, that dual aspect gets replicated all the way through the universe, whether we're talking about left and right, up and down, or positive and negative emotions. You see duality everywhere because the whole of the universe of form is actually created from that duality. But the universe loses something when it creates that separation, because that separation is a type of illusion. Because the reality, the permanent and infinite reality of the universe is unity. It's oneness, or what some people call non-duality. That's a very popular phrase now in spirituality, non-duality. That's the opposite of duality, of course. Duality is separation into two. Non-duality is unity, wholeness, oneness. So the universe creates the illusion of separation. Oh yeah, no worries, no worries. We're just starting out. We're just starting out. We're talking about reincarnation part 2, which is about spiritual evolution. And before talking about reincarnation, which is a part of spiritual evolution, we're taking it to a broader concept, a broader aspect of spiritual evolution. And we're talking about the whole universe here. So the universe creates, or the source of the universe creates separation, the illusion of separation, which is duality, which then goes on to create all the universe of form, including stars. It starts with stars and galaxies and planets and dust. Dust is everywhere in the universe. So it creates all this matter. And there's also magnetic fields going on as well. So it creates all of that with this separation of positive and negative energy. And then you see this duality repeated all the way through the physical universe of form. And the physical universe of form would not be able to exist if it wasn't for that separation. So it has to be there. But it's a type of illusion. And the universe loses its self-awareness in that illusion. It loses its self-awareness in that separation. Because the ultimate purpose of the universe is to know itself. The ultimate purpose of the universe is to go on a journey of knowing itself. So it loses its self-awareness in all of that form, in that separation. And then it goes on a journey of spiritual evolution to actually regain its self-awareness and to know itself as a unity, as a oneness. Because that separation has created the illusion of separation. And then it goes on a journey to come back to its unity. It's like a journey home for the source of the universe. And it does that through the journey of growing awareness. It does that through the journey of life. The journey of life is a journey of growing awareness. So life on this planet, now there's life on lots and lots of planets, but life on this planet, as an example, starts very, very, very small. Just the movement of molecules, chemical reactions. And then it evolves more and more and gets more and more complex. And then single-celled life starts to appear. You know, some people might even say that even the reaction to light, for example, knowing to go away from light or go towards light or go towards food or away from danger. You know, these are responses to environment. And some people consider that as part of life. And you could consider that as part of awareness as well. It's a rudimentary awareness of one's surroundings, even in a single-celled life form like an amoeba or something. Now that life evolves and evolves, lots of little changes over long periods of time, and then more complex forms of life start to evolve. And with more complex forms of life generally comes growing levels of intelligence and growing levels of awareness. And then if we go into the animal kingdom now, you might say that a mouse has a consciousness. It is aware. It has a level of awareness, but it doesn't have self-awareness, does it? A mouse is not self-aware. It doesn't know that it's a mouse. But then carry on down the evolutionary chain of growing complexity and intelligence, and you might get to a dog, something like that. Now, many dogs actually have a basic level of self-awareness. Some dogs can actually look in the mirror and recognize themselves in the reflection, is just an example here. Other dogs may not. Different species are different. But if a dog doesn't recognize itself, it might attack the mirror, for example, because it thinks it's another dog. But some dogs have a basic level of self-awareness. Now, go a little bit further into humans, and humans have self-awareness. They know they are a human. All humans, I hope, know that they are a human being. That's quite a high level of self-awareness. But that's not the highest level of self-awareness, because the universe itself can become self-aware through a human being, through a conscious being in the universe. The next level of awareness is for the universe to realize itself through that conscious being. So that is spiritual evolution, the universe knowing itself, but through the journey of growing awareness and into self-awareness. So that is spiritual evolution if we look at it in universal terms. Now, don't forget, we've talked about that happening on this planet. That's happening on all sorts of planets, of course. Life is not just confined to this planet. It's happening everywhere in the universe. So they've all got their, other planets have all got their journeys of life and journeys of growing awareness. So let's look a little bit closer at spiritual evolution on this planet, and in particular in humans, because reincarnation itself is a part of spiritual evolution. But that doesn't mean that reincarnation exists on all planets. Reincarnation, as far as we know, is specific to this planet. It may be on other planets as well, but it doesn't have to be. And the reason is because reincarnation itself is part of biological evolution. So we talked about that in the last lesson. We talked about how reincarnation and biological evolution are the same thing, really. So reincarnation, what we're saying here is that reincarnation evolved millions of years ago in early animals, and it's just part of biological evolution. And biological evolution is already fully accepted in mainstream science, of course. So reincarnation is a part of spiritual evolution. And we could call spiritual evolution, we could define it here as the long journey of evolution and progression of the soul through many incarnations, with the ultimate goal being the source of the universe becoming self-aware and knowing itself. So reincarnation is an integral part of spiritual evolution on this planet, and especially in humans. So how do humans, well, let's talk about the human aspect of spiritual evolution, and in terms of the soul, in terms of the higher mind. Because the higher mind, or the soul, if you remember, the soul is the higher mind plus the energy body. But through this lesson, I might just refer to the higher mind as the soul, just because the higher mind is the thinking part of the soul. So the higher mind evolves through many animal species until it gets to humans, and humans are the most complex and intelligent species on this planet. I know it doesn't look like it sometimes, and there's a great range of spiritual development, of course, in the human species. But let's talk about the higher mind in terms of the collective higher mind, because the higher mind is the vehicle for awareness. The higher mind is the vehicle for the awareness of the source. We talked about that in the last lesson. But the higher mind itself is not a separate little entity. It kind of is. It's one vehicle. The soul has its own energies and it's separate from other souls. But they are connected. They are connected in a network, which we could call the collective higher mind. Now think of it in terms of an example. A good example here would be a hive system. I think I mentioned this last week as well. A hive system like bees or ants or termites, lots of individuals in the group, but really you can also refer to the whole group as one entity sometimes, because they're all working in unison, they're all working together, they've all got specialized roles, and they live for the good of the group, the good of the one entity. And that's a little bit like how higher minds work. Higher minds are all connected in this grid, in this network. Now, there's no hierarchies in the collective higher mind. The hierarchies are a thing of lower mind and ego. Social hierarchies have evolved because of the human ego and the lower mind, and they're perfectly natural, of course, and they exist in societies of animals and humans. But that's where hierarchies come from. So I'm mentioning this because it's quite normal for the mind to start thinking in terms of hierarchies, because that's how we've evolved. But it's important to mention that higher minds don't have hierarchies at all. They're all the same. They might have specialized roles, but they are all the same. There is no hierarchies at all. And it's all about sharing and assisting. It's all about helping each other. It's all about helping each other to progress and also teaching others. And there's no emotions evolved in higher minds. Emotions are processed by the lower mind. And of course, it's our conscious awareness that feels them consciously. But emotions are processed by the lower mind. There are no emotions processed by the higher mind. So there's no negativity in the higher mind. So all pain, suffering, negativity is all in the lower mind, or processed by the lower mind and experienced in conscious awareness. So it's all about sharing and assisting. And of course, they live in an interconnected network. And there is a connection between higher minds, and they connect through a form of telepathy. And it's information transfer, constant information transfer back and forth between all the individuals in the network. So they're constantly communicating. And obviously, most of the time, we're not aware about this at all. And in fact, next lesson, we're going to talk about the collective mind. Next lesson is the collective mind. And we're going to talk about that telepathy and that connection between higher minds. We're going to do some telepathy and energy transfer exercises between us all as well. But that's next week. But they live in an interconnected network. So you could say that there is one family, one life. Now we're going to talk about soul families a bit later on in this lesson. But we have a soul family. Higher minds reincarnate and work together in families. But they also overlap, these soul families, they overlap to such a degree that you could call the whole of humanity one family, one life. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Now, another very important point to mention here is that the only difference between higher minds is the stage of their journey, the stage of their development. That is all it is. Young soul, old soul, that type of thing. That's the only real difference here. And I mention this again because when we teach about reincarnation, we've got to be very clear about this, because there are some hideous misinterpretations of spiritual evolution out there. And the best example I can give is the caste system in India, which is less prevalent now, but it used to be quite influential in society. So the caste system is very loosely based on spiritual evolution, levels of spiritual evolution. That's what it kind of is based on. But in the end, it evolved. The ego got hold of it, the human ego got hold of it and turned it into a hideous system of hierarchies in human society. So if you're born into one caste that's lower than another caste, you're not as good as that person in the higher caste. Now that is a terrible misrepresentation of spiritual evolution. So I want to make that point where whenever we're teaching reincarnation, we've got to really hammer that home, is that higher minds are all the same. It's only the stage of their development or where they are in their journey that actually makes them different to each other. Yeah, well, look, I think this is a cracking conversation, and I think. And it's a wider conversation out there that everyone's having, isn't it? But I would say that you've got to trust the plan, trust the infinite plan, trust the global awakening plan. It's all set in stone. There's no deviation from it. So this growing AI is part of that plan. But there's no way that it's these nihilistic sort of predictions that AI is going to destroy humans. I don't think that's it. Remotely possible whatsoever. And just going back to the consciousness issue, we should always remember as well that these are computers and they don't have a conscious awareness filter. They have no conscious experience. They have no awareness. They are a computer, and these computers may get very, very, very clever and very intelligent. But at the end of the day, they are just computers. And a little bit like the higher mind, the way that the higher mind thinks, just bringing it back to the higher mind now, the higher mind thinks like a very, very advanced supercomputer. In fact, it is a type of quantum computer, the higher mind, because the connections that it has in the cognition circuits at the back of the mind, and we'll talk about this when we talk about anatomy of the higher mind. But those cognition circuits it has, the connections it has are so far in advance of the brain. So the brain's connections are through neurons, and they're pretty small. There's trillions of neurons in the brain, but in the higher mind, the connections that it can form are so much smaller because they're even smaller than the size of an electron. So it makes the connections so much more vast in the higher mind, which is why it's so trying to understand how the higher mind thinks is almost an impossible task, really. But that's why it's a supercomputer, a biological supercomputer. That's the thinking part of the mind. But the filter is where the awareness is happening, and that's where your consciousness is, and that's you. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that that souls will ever go into machines. I mean, we may become integrated with machines in terms of the material body, but I don't think the soul will ever go into a machine, because it's I don't see the point. You know, that they evolve together. That we're one system, really, and all the anatomy, right down to subtle energy, tiny subtle energy anatomy, is all integrated into one. And then the universe is becoming self-realized in these conscious beings. So it's reached its goal. So I think that is the purpose of the universe. Okay, so moving on then. So in humans, we're talking about human evolution now, the higher minds in humans, the higher minds that evolve and reincarnate through the human journey. So we got to talk about Kundalini growth, haven't we? Because this is part of the human journey of spiritual evolution. And it's what allows the humans to take that next step. You know, many people ask, you know, why are animals not as highly evolved as humans? I mean, when you look at it, look out the window, you could say, some humans, the way they're acting, don't look very spiritually evolved, do they? But there is a difference. There is a difference between the animal species and the human species. And it is to do with the Kundalini. It allows the human being to become self-realized. And it does it through a journey of emotional intelligence. Human emotional intelligence. Now, many animals are very intelligent. Many animals have a level of emotional intelligence. Many animals live in social groups with social hierarchies, and you know, emotions play a massive factor in their life. However, there isn't another species which has evolved to the point that humans have with emotional intelligence. Even in chimpanzee societies or dolphin societies, which are probably the two most advanced of the animal species, there is still a level of emotional intelligence that humans have that animals don't have. And that is a self-analysis component to the emotions, an understanding of the emotions in oneself, an understanding of emotions in others, and the ability to manage those emotions. That is a human thing. And not all humans have got there yet, but it is a human thing, and it is the Kundalini system which allows that. And of course, this is not part of mainstream science. In case you're wondering, Kundalini system is part of the energy body. It's a subtle energy system. It's not part of the material body, so it hasn't been discovered by mainstream science, of course. But hopefully one day we'll change that in the future, because it is part of our anatomy. So the Kundalini system allows emotional intelligence in humans. So let's have a look at the anatomy of the Kundalini system, because we've talked quite a bit about the Kundalini system through this course, and we talk about it here and there. We've never looked at it in great detail. So this is the Kundalini system. So you can see the material body there. You can see the energy body, which is extends to about 10 centimeters outside the material body. And you can see in white the Kundalini system, which runs up the spinal column. So this is it in a bit more detail. So as you can see, the chakras are involved. The major chakras People call them the major chakras. In fact, some people call the 7 chakras the major chakras. But basically, the major chakras are the chakras that sit along the spinal column. There are hundreds of chakras in the energy body, but these are the major ones because they're on the spinal column. And these ones are part of the Kundalini system. So these are the chakras that you know already. So the root chakra, the sacral, the solar plexus, the heart chakra, the throat chakra. Those are the emotion chakras. Remember, those 5 chakras are the emotion chakras. That's from the bioenergy layer or from the pyramid course. Those are the ones that regulate emotions. And then you've got the brow chakra here, which is at the location of the pituitary gland, just behind the eyes, just at the front of the brain. And then you've got the crown chakra, which is a little bit further up and a little bit back. That's at the location of the pineal gland in the brain. And then you've got the 8th chakra and the 9th chakra. And the 9th chakra is the connection to the source. The 9th chakra is a fascinating thing, and maybe one day we'll do a lesson on the anatomy inside the 9th chakra. Probably not part of this course, though. But the 9th chakra, there's a little region of non-physical reality there, and things can get created out of nothing. That's why things start coming down out of the 9th chakra as you go through Kundalini awakening. I'll talk about that in a second. But it's because things can get created direct from the source, and then come down into the human system. So that is the bindu, that little round dot at the back of the head. That is an organ in the energy body, but it is not a chakra. It's not a chakra. It doesn't pump energy, because if you remember, chakras are energy pumps. Hi, Jules. Got a question? Yeah, that's actually a bindi with an I. So that's the purple dot that goes in the brow chakra. They call that a bindi. Yeah, so it's just one letter difference, and this is the bindu. Yeah. Yeah, but well spotted. And Sharon, hello. The bindu doesn't have a color because it doesn't process energy like the chakras do. So the chakras, we only depict them as a color, and we only see them as a color because they process a particular frequency of energy. For example, the other chakras around the body, the other hundreds of chakras around the body, also don't have a color. It's the major chakras, or it's the major chakras. Actually, it's the 7 major chakras from root to crown that actually process the frequencies of subtle energy, which is why we see them as those colors, different frequencies. Okay. And you can see a central spinal channel, which is the black line that goes up the spine. Notice that there's a bit of a dog leg there. It goes to the brow chakra, back to the bindu. So the bindu is part of the Kundalini system, but it's not a chakra. And then it goes to the crown chakra, and then up to the 9th chakra. That's the central spinal channel. And you can see this double helix going around the central spinal channel. That is the bliss channels. There are 2 channels, and they're bliss channels. They get activated during Kundalini awakening, and this is what actually allows the sensations of bliss, spiritual bliss. Sometimes you may hear the words Ida and Pingala. That's Eastern terms for the 2 bliss channels, or in yoga philosophy, you could say. Ida and Pingala. Also, the central spinal channel is sometimes called the Sushumna, but these are ancient traditional words. And also, something you might hear is these labels that's just appeared on the right-hand side there. Lower chakras, mid chakras, and higher chakras. I'll just put that in there just because some people refer to the lower chakras as or those 3 as the lower chakras, and then you've got your mid chakras. And the higher chakras tend to be the brow, the crown, and the 8th. So this Kundalini system, it grows. It doesn't just appear. It's not part of the human anatomy from the start. It actually grows, and it grows over many, many, many incarnations. And it's a little bit like climbing the rungs of a ladder. And this is how you can think of the Kundalini system when you're helping other people, when you're teaching other people, when you're giving other people healing. It's important to know where their Kundalini system is sometimes, because it can help you tailor the healing that you're giving to them. So it's a bit like climbing the rungs of a ladder. However, there is another analogy that we can use, and it's almost a better way to think of it, I think. It's a bit like discarding layers. Now, this is turning it upside down and looking at it from a different angle. It's a bit like discarding layers. So think of these layers. Now, it's quite a common analogy that's used already, in fact. Like the analogy of an onion is used quite a lot. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. That's a very popular analogy. So this is our onion here, and you've got the layers that you can see there in different colors. So each layer, you could say, is a layer of learning, and you learn as you go over many incarnations. Each layer is also a level of frequency. So if you think of the Kundalini system and the different frequencies of each chakra, well, as the Kundalini grows through each chakra, it's going through a different frequency of energy because each chakra processes different frequencies of energy. So each layer is actually a chakra of Kundalini. That's why you've got the colors there. You've got the root chakra on the outside, then the sacral, then the solar plexus, etc. Now the center, which is depicted here in white, is the true self. That's unity. That is oneness itself. It is also pure awareness. So all these layers of learning are gradually being removed, and you're getting to the center. The goal is to get to the center, which is unity and pure awareness. Now, you could also say that each layer is a layer of illusion, because if we go back to the beginning of this lesson, we talked about the source which creates separation and the duality of form, but it's an illusion. It loses itself in that illusion. And this journey is a journey back to its true unity, its true self. So you could also say that these layers are illusions of separation, layers of illusion of separation. So you want to peel back all these layers through the journey of spiritual evolution. So let's do that. Let's go on this journey. And at the start, let's say at the start of a human journey, when a soul first incarnates into its first human incarnation, that high mind, we could say, is asleep. It reincarnates automatically, it reincarnates naturally, but it's a subconscious or unconscious process. It just happens normally, naturally, part of nature. When it comes into a human being for the first time, that's still the case. It's still doing that. So the Kundalini system is not grown yet. On the left there you can see the Kundalini system. It hasn't grown yet. The chakras are in place. It hasn't grown yet. So the emotion chakras are not yet linked together, because that's a big part of the Kundalini system. It links the emotional centers together, and then it links them into the lower mind. And that's what allows the lower mind and brain to analyze those emotions. Those emotion chakras have to be linked together and then linked into the lower mind. That's how the Kundalini system is a system of emotional intelligence. And also the high mind intuition pathways are not yet grown, because high mind intuition is communication between high mind and lower mind. It's guidance for the lower mind. It's how the higher mind guides the lower mind. But in a high mind who is asleep, there is no guidance coming through to the lower mind. So in this case, the lower mind is on its own. And therefore it's subject to its own environment, its own upbringing, its own genetics, its own karma. So at some point, that higher mind will wake up. And we'll talk about that more in just a second, but it will wake up to itself. It will realize that it's reincarnating, and it will start growing its Kundalini system. We'll talk about that more in a second, but it starts growing the Kundalini system. So here you can see that the central spinal channel has grown from the Kundalini bulb up to the root chakra. So part of spiritual evolution is also lesson learning. That's a very common and popular understanding, of course. Lesson learning, emotional lesson learning is part of spiritual evolution. And as the Kundalini grows through the chakras, this is where the emotional lesson learning happens. So as it grows through the root chakra, it's the root chakra emotions and characteristics that form most of the lesson learning. So the root chakra is all about safety, security, and survival. And then once those lessons have been learnt, we shed away that layer, and then we move on to the sacral. So this is where you can see the central spinal channel has grown from the root to the sacral. And the sacral is reproduction and parental care, and all of those characteristics involved in that. So the lesson learning is going to be along those lines. And then we move on to the solar plexus. It's now grown up to the solar plexus, and that's identification with beliefs. And this is happening over many, many incarnations. Remember, it's not like one chakra per incarnation or anything. It takes a long, long time, or traditionally speaking, it takes a long, long time. After the global awakening, it's going to take a lot less time because the culture will have changed and all this will be known about. So it will go much quicker after the global awakening. That's the whole point of the global awakening. Anyway, so we're at the solar plexus level and we move on to the heart level. So the central spinal channel has grown up to the heart. So this is where lots of lesson learning to do with attachments to loving relationships. And this is a very important one. This is a very important part of the spiritual development journey. This is when compassion really starts to flow from that person. Compassion for others without any personal benefit. Compassion for random strangers, for example. This is where we need to get as many people on the planet as possible up to this level, because then we see a tipping point and then the planet or the world starts to change. Then we move up to the throat chakra, and the central spinal channel has grown into the throat chakra. This is all about communication and self-expression. So then we go up to the brow chakra. So that's emotional lesson learning is done then. So there's no more emotional lesson learning because it's grown through the emotion chakras, but it still has some growing to do. It grows into the brow chakra. Now this is a very highly developed soul at this point. This is a very evolved soul that's got to the brow chakra, because the next one is the crown chakra. So just as a quick aside here, actually, I would say that everyone here today would have started this incarnation at the brow chakra level, or let's say in between the brow chakra and the crown chakra. Because the crown chakra, when the Kundalini system gets to the crown chakra, this is when Kundalini awakening happens. So this is the point where the Kundalini system is ready to awaken. Now we'll talk more about Kundalini awakening in just a second, but this is the point. And during the Kundalini phase, that central spinal channel, as you can see here now, has grown up to the ninth chakra. So it zooms up to the ninth chakra at this point. And this allows this person to become pure awareness, to find the true self or become the true self. And just to clarify here, it is possible to find the awareness of the true self at any stage of spiritual evolution. Anyone can do that, but it comes and goes. So anybody can find pure awareness, their true self, during meditation, but it comes and goes, and there's still a lot of emotions and turbulence. The thing that's different here is that all that completely disappears, and you go through a transformation and you become that pure awareness all the time. And in Eastern traditional language, that is called samadhi. Samadhi. So that central spinal channel that goes up to the ninth chakra allows for what we call the descent of the source, or universal light descent, to become pure awareness, to experience that in the awareness filter. So these layers, in a short summary, everyone is the same. We are one at the very core, that pure awareness. And don't forget that pure awareness is non-physical. That's not made of form. It's completely non-physical. And we discard layers of evolution until we get to that center, until we strip away all these layers of illusion until we get to our true state of being, which actually, ironically, we find that it's nothing. There's nothing there. We are made of nothing. So all these layers of illusion that we thought we were identified with, that's who we thought we were. We get rid of all that until we actually find that we're actually made of nothing. But it is a pure, peaceful, aware nothing. So these layers of illusion, well, they correspond to our false identification with the body and the mind. So all these layers of illusion, layers of learning. You have to go through the layers of learning to get rid of these layers of evolution, of illusion. But those layers, that's what corresponds to our false identification with all the stuff in the mind and the body. We think, we spent our lives thinking that that's who we are, the material body and all the stuff in the mind, all that conditioning. Well, we shed it all bit by bit. We disidentify with all that until we find our true self. And this is what we call Maya, which is another traditional term, Eastern, originally a Sanskrit word, I think. Maya, which means the veil of illusion. Now, the veil of illusion refers to all these layers of who we are not. But it also refers to the whole universe, back to the start of the lesson. The universe creates that separation, which is an illusion, the duality of the universe. It's an illusion. All that is Maya. Now, I'm bringing that up because Maya is going to be an important word for us later on in this course, because through self-realization we grow an organ in the higher mind called the Maya organ. And how it works is all about interacting with the veil of illusion. I'm not going to talk about that more now. We'll talk about that in the more advanced lessons of energy healing. The next thing we are going to talk about is Kundalini awakening. So we've talked about the growing of the Kundalini system through the major chakras, through the emotional centers, the emotion chakras, and the lesson learning that goes through that accompanies that growth. And then we said that once the central spinal channel is got to the crown chakra, then it's ready for Kundalini awakening. So let's talk about Kundalini awakening now. So all of you guys have gone through this already. So you're looking at this retrospectively. And you could also say that the whole of the journey of spiritual evolution or spiritual development is to get to the point of Kundalini awakening, because from then on things change completely. So you guys have been through the Kundalini phase. Everyone here has been through the Kundalini phase and is now into the phases of self-realization, which is another conversation entirely. But let's talk about the Kundalini phase, because whenever you go through this yourself, it is inevitable that at some point you're going to be helping somebody else go through it. That's how this works. That's how soul groups work, soul families work. So everyone that goes through self-realization in some way will become a teacher and a healer of some kind. And that can be expressed in many different ways. That doesn't mean that you're going to be literally a teacher with classes of people or anything, but in some way that will be expressed through you, education, teaching and healing. So let's talk about the Kundalini phase. So the Kundalini system has different sections to it. So this is section 1, and this is the section that we call the chakras. Now, if you do your research on Kundalini, most of the time you'll find that this is the section which is most known about. So a lot of the information online will talk about the chakras section and maybe less about the other sections. But this is the first section, section 1. And as that Kundalini awakens, it starts from the Kundalini bulb. And by the way, I should have said earlier really that in popular or ancient mythology, it's depicted as a serpent. It's depicted as a snake, a coiled snake, which sits at the base of the spine. So when you Google Kundalini, you'll probably see loads of pictures of snakes and things like that. So it's depicted as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine. And what can a coiled serpent do, a coiled snake? It can spring. It springs into action. That's why they used the analogy of a snake, a metaphor of a snake. So this coiled snake, or the energy, K1, which we call it, is sat dormant at the base of the spine in the Kundalini bulb, underneath the root chakra, and it's dormant until it's ready to awaken. And when it awakens, it will start making its way through the central spinal channel, up the spine, through all the major centers, major chakras, major emotion chakras. And if there are blockages in those chakras, then those blockages have to be attended to, because that Kundalini K1 energy will hit those blockages, send shock waves out through the nervous system and cause Kundalini symptoms. Now, we won't talk about that in depth right now, maybe at the end of the lesson if we have time. But we're talking about the journey of K1 here. So the journey of K1 goes through all the major chakras. Once those blockages have become unblocked, it goes through all the chakras, through the brow chakra, and it ends its journey at the Bindu. Now that's section 1. Now section 2 is called Universal Light Descent. And this is the journey of K2. So K2 is the energy that moves from the ninth chakra down to the crown chakra. And you can think of these movements of energy as opening pipework. It's like the pipework has been laid, the pipework has been constructed, and this is the grand opening day. This is the day where it gets turned on. So these energies move through the vessels and activate them. It clears the way and makes them open, makes them into channels. So section 2 allows an open channel from the ninth chakra down to the crown chakra, and that is for the purpose of downloading things from the source. And section 3 there, you've got a very short section, and there's not much information about this one online, and it's a bit confused online. So if you do your research, be careful, because there's a lot of nonsense out there, and it's also a bit confusing. But you've got section 3, and that goes from the crown chakra down to the Bindu, and that is the movement of energy K3, and that is called the migration of identity. We've called it the migration of identity because that's what it refers to. It allows the process of disentangling oneself from the false self and then re-identifying with the true self, with awareness, with the source identity. So a new identity comes in. So during self-realization, or during the Kundalini phase, the false identity crumbles. The false identity shatters and disappears. And that's why sometimes people actually lose a sense of direction and lose a sense of self. The identity starts to think, I don't know where I'm going in my life. I don't know who I am anymore. That's very common during that phase. But as you go through the phases of self-realization, a new identity starts to come down from the ninth chakra. So section 3 allows that process to happen, the migration of identity. Right, okay, yeah. So let's explain that a little bit. So it will always start at the Kundalini bulb. So K1 will always start. And then as K1 gets to the solar plexus, it will activate section 2, and K2 will start to come down. So K1 might not always finish before K2. And then at some point, K3 will be activated and starts its journey. And it doesn't actually go K1, in terms of finishing their journey, it doesn't actually go K1, K2, K3. It can vary, basically. But the Kundalini phase is finished when they've all finished their journey. But what happens with K1 and K3, you could say, is the end of the Kundalini phase, because K1 and K3 actually mix together in the Bindu. And then they form energy K4, which is not on this diagram. K4 goes into the lower mind and starts making some transformations. Starts the journey of self-realization. Now, K3 and K1 actually have been depicted in ancient mythology as Shiva and Shakti. But actually what's going on here, I prefer to talk about it in technical terms, to be honest, because we can understand more about what's going on. It's energy K1 and K3 mixing together. So some more stuff on this diagram just to be aware of. You've got a little dot there around the forehead area, just in front of the brow chakra. That's actually a valve, and it goes to the energy body circulation. And then you've got this pipe that it's on, that's coming right down to the root chakra. That is a loop which makes the Kundalini system a loop, a circular loop. And golden energy actually flows through that loop, because golden energy is one of the things that comes down from the source. I'll talk about that in a second. But golden energy then gets transferred to the energy body through the energy body circulation valve, which I've labeled there. And another thing that happens during Kundalini is that the heart chakra turns blue, deep electric blue. And that has to do with unconditional love, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. So just as a close-up of the head area. So just in summary there, K1 comes up through the chakras and goes towards the Bindu, ends its journey at the Bindu. K2 comes down from the ninth chakra, ends its journey at the crown chakra. K3 moves from the crown chakra to the Bindu, and then K1 and K3 mix together in the Bindu, and then start the whole self-realization transformation process. So what happens after Kundalini phase? Well, first of all, there's a few things that get downloaded from the ninth chakra. The first one is source golden energy. So normally we get our energy from our surroundings. Our golden energy normally comes in through our chakras. And we know that, we've talked about in previous lessons, that every cell of the material body needs a constant supply of this golden energy in a Krebs cycle. Not part of mainstream science, of course. That's our theory, that it goes through the meridians into every cell of the body, and it's needed as part of the Krebs cycle to make ATP energy for the material body. Normally we get that golden energy from our surroundings. We breathe it in through our chakras. As we breathe in, air's coming into our lungs, but also our chakras are spinning wildly, which is bringing in golden energy from the outside. But during this process, that golden energy starts coming from the ninth chakra, and we get an unlimited supply of golden energy coming down. And this is why sometimes a particular Kundalini symptom is people holding too much golden energy, because the energy body actually has to expand and grow at the same time. And if there's too much golden energy coming in and the expansion hasn't quite caught up, you tend to get an excess of golden energy. And that can make you feel quite unstable sometimes, which is why grounding exercises are very useful to solve that. But eventually the energy body will catch up, and you don't get that anymore. But the source golden energy comes down from the ninth chakra, and then it gets transferred to the energy body via that little valve there. Unconditional love also comes down from the ninth chakra into the person through the Kundalini system. This comes from the source. This is source unconditional love. And this is why the heart chakra turns a deep electric blue color. And that unconditional love is a way for the source to express itself in the physical world of form. And it's doing that through individual conscious beings. And that unconditional love is created at the ninth chakra. It comes down the Kundalini system, and it comes into the heart chakra and then out of the heart chakra and is expressed in the world. And it goes out in all directions through that person. And the third thing that comes down from the ninth chakra after the Kundalini phase is Akashic intuition. And that is a form of knowledge and guidance. Now we're going to have a whole lesson, or whole 2 lessons on intuition, so I won't say too much here. But generally speaking, intuition normally we think of as higher mind to lower mind communication, how the higher mind governs or guides the lower mind in the life plan. Well, actually now it starts to completely come from the ninth chakra, and the higher mind starts to just become a channel for that Akashic intuition. So intuition, you go on a journey of intuition through self-realization. We'll talk about that later. So one thing to mention always when we're talking about Kundalini, when we are teaching Kundalini, and it's important to teach Kundalini to people. However, it's also important to give this message of leave it alone. Don't try and awaken it manually, because people are impatient, and people quite often do these Kundalini yoga techniques, which actually can activate it manually. That's quite popular now, and it's leaving people in all sorts of distress. There's all sorts of problems that can happen when Kundalini awakens manually. I know we talked about this not long ago. So if the levels of karma are too high, then there's going to be too many emotional reactions, which means too many blockages to the chakras. And then that K1 is going to hit those blockages, and it's not going to be able to go past, and those Kundalini symptoms are going to be devastating. Also, if the Kundalini is only half grown, then of course that is a problem as well, because if you awaken that K1, which is a very powerful energy, it then causes a Kundalini rupture, because it goes up the half-grown Kundalini system, explodes in the energy body, causes a rupture, and that can cause some serious psychological damage, because this is a system of emotional intelligence. So if you mess with it, if you damage it, it's going to cause a lot of problems, emotionally and psychologically. Right then, so let's move on from Kundalini and talk about life plans. Let's talk about the journey of evolution of souls. So first of all, as I mentioned earlier, the higher mind starts in a sleeping state. It's not aware of its own reincarnation. It doesn't have a higher mind organized life plan. But I should mention here about the infinite Akashic source plan. There is an infinite plan in the universe. It's all predetermined. Now, it's not something that you can separate, but to try and understand it, we can pretend to separate it, and we can say that everything has its own plan. I think we talked about this last week, but this coaster, you could say has its own plan within that infinite source. A stone has a plan within that infinite source. If you're going to try and separate it, you can say that everything has a plan to it. It's part of the infinite plan of the source. But in higher minds, a sleeping higher mind will not be aware of its own reincarnation. It functions naturally, and it's a natural process of reincarnation. And there is no higher mind organized life plan. So yes, it might be part of the infinite Akashic source plan. So everyone has a plan, you could say. But the higher mind is not calculating a life plan for each incarnation yet. The lower mind is locked in a dream in between incarnations. So in between incarnations, the lower mind is just dreaming. And it doesn't know it's dreaming. That's the key here, because the astral dimensions are a dream world, a collective dream world. We'll talk about the astral dimensions when we talk about the collective. But the person is locked in a dream in between incarnations, and it doesn't know it's dreaming at this point. And this is why dream yoga and dream lucidity are very important to teach people, because if you become lucid in your dreams, that means you become awake in your dream. You know that you're dreaming while you're dreaming. Then that can actually help, if you practice that through your lifetime, that can actually help after you leave the material body. So this can actually help to wake higher minds up. It can help the higher mind actually become aware of its own reincarnation. And you can actually wake up higher minds yourself. And teaching people about reincarnation can actually wake up higher minds. They can actually become aware of their own reincarnation just through teaching people through the lower mind. That is very possible. The higher mind has to be ready for it. It has to have evolved to a point where it's ready for that, of course, because there is a time period when a soul first incarnates into a human. There is a time period of evolution while it's getting ready, and then at some point it will become ready to wake up to itself. And at that point, we can call that higher mind awake, because it's awake to its own reincarnation. It realizes that it's reincarnating. And at this point, it can start to access past life information, past life memories. It suddenly becomes aware of all its past life memories. And then it looks at its karma. It can start to identify what karma it's got in the energy body. And then it can correlate the two. It can look at a piece of karma and go, well, that was caused in that life. That's where that comes from. So it's a level of analysis, of self-analysis. And that's very important in constructing life plans. It also learns about the goal of life, self-realization. And generally speaking, I think this actually comes from other souls, other higher minds informing it. And this is when it starts to build its own Kundalini system. This is when it starts to grow the Kundalini system at this point. And it starts with laying the framework, laying the foundations to the whole Kundalini system. And then the central spinal channel will gradually grow up the spine. And this is the point where it starts to form bonds with other higher minds. It forms soul families and soul agreements. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And this happens gradually. This isn't just over 1 or 2 incarnations. This happens in a very gradual process. And this is now when it can start to build or make its life plans, a calculated higher mind life plan, which is different to a plan which is part of the infinite plan of the source. This is the higher mind which is thinking about its next incarnation and planning it. And this is when intuition pathways start to grow as well, because there's all well and good having a plan for the life, but if the lower mind just keeps deviating from the plan, what's the point of that? So the higher mind has to keep that lower mind on its plan, keep navigating through life. And it does that through intuition. Intuition pathways start to. And this is when it starts to be able to learn from others that are further along, and then start teaching people who are not as far along. And this comes back to the whole idea of helping and assisting each other. So let's talk about soul agreements now. As part of life plans, we make soul agreements. Now, soul agreements, soul families and soul agreements sounds nice, doesn't it? Sounds like a lovely concept. But I've got to burst a bubble here, because unfortunately, quite often it's not very nice. Because although we're helping each other, one big part of having life plans is all about removing negative karma, because we have to remove negative karma to get to the goal. So one thing that higher minds do for each other is to help each other remove negative karma. That actually means quite often that means conflict and falling out, especially within tight families, people that love each other, because that causes the most hurt. Because we know that when we feel an emotional reaction, we're burning karma. That's how it gets burnt quite often. That's the natural way. So a soul agreement will often mean falling out in some way, having an argument. So it's not always lovely. But the ultimate goal, the ultimate purpose is spiritual evolution. And going even further, sometimes it actually means that one person may die. One person may leave that incarnation. And that's part of a soul agreement, because it has an impact on everyone around them. Grief, for example, is a type of karma that needs to be burnt off. So that is a very common thing as well. So here's an example of a couple of life plans. So if you think about all these dots as decision points to make in one's life, and you've got 2 life plans starting on the left there, and they're in different colours. So 2 higher minds may organise to meet each other at a particular time in their life. And you can see that here as the 2 plans cross over and meet. But each of those decision points, there is a decision to be made by the lower mind. So the higher mind calculates all this out in front of it. That's why it's a supercomputer. It can calculate, and this is just a simplified version, obviously. Think about a real life with all the different decisions to make, all the different paths to follow. It becomes super complicated. But the higher mind has calculated it all out. But at every decision point, that lower mind has got to make the right decision. So this is why intuition is so important. Intuition grows over many incarnations. When a soul is first starting out with intuition, it's not going to be very good at it. Those intuition pathways are going to be weak, and that lower mind is going to make the wrong decision. It's going to fall off the life plan. And that happens a lot. But as that soul develops and grows, and the intuition pathways grow stronger and stronger, it follows the life plan with more and more accuracy, to the point of, say, a soul that's ready for self-realization, for example. The life plan will be followed almost 100%, because the intuition pathways are so strong. Another concept to mention is soul families. So I've talked quite a bit about soul families already, how when a higher mind becomes awake or is woken up, it then joins a soul family. And soul families are groups of souls that are reincarnating together. And quite often it's souls of the same or similar spiritual development level. Not always, but generally speaking. And they reincarnate together and meet up in different incarnations again and again. Now, I like to think of soul families a little bit like WhatsApp groups. So you've got your your immediate soul family. It's a bit like you've got a WhatsApp group. But actually they overlap. Soul families will overlap. You may be part of many soul families. And it's a bit like WhatsApp groups. They overlap. You can be part of different WhatsApp groups and you haven't just got one WhatsApp group. So think about soul families in this way. They're overlapping, but actually that spreads out. So soul families actually spread out further and further and further. And you can say you can be once removed or twice removed from a soul family, a bit like cousins or something. But then you can take it even further out to the level of the planet. The whole of humanity, you could say, is your soul family, because they're all overlapped, they're all interlocked, they're all really part of one big soul family. You can actually take that even further, to be honest. You can even take that to the whole, all of souls on this planet, you could say, are part of the same soul family. And you can even go even a step further. You could say, well, why does that just include this planet? That includes all planets in the universe, of course. We have a planetary soul group as well. And that can extend to the whole universe. And then we're back to the concept of one life, one family. Okay, so lastly, a bit more on a summary of life plans and what consists of a life plan, what is involved in a life plan. Well, burning off negative karma emotion is one of the biggest parts of a life plan, because that is one of the most important things to reach the goal of self-realization, because that's what stops people. That's what inhibits spiritual growth. Negative emotions will inhibit lesson learning. Emotional reactivity will inhibit lesson learning quite often. I mean, it can be part of lesson learning as well, of course. But too much karma is going to inhibit lesson learning. And learning how to stop producing it is the next point. So we try and remove our levels of negative karma, and we try and learn to stop producing it. Otherwise, we get stuck in this wheel of karma, which in traditional language is often called samsara, the endless wheel of suffering. Reincarnation and rebirth and karma, although it isn't endless, of course. Lesson learning is also a big part of life plans. Kundalini growth and helping others is a massive part of life plans. And all these really can be classified with the general title of progression towards self-realization. That's what a life plan is really about. Amongst other things, I add that there just because we try and simplify this down, don't we, to try and understand it, but there's going to be all sorts of more complex things that are part of it. So we can summarize that with amongst other things. Now, through the life plan, there is a growing of Akashic intuition. So this is a point to mention about intuition. We'll talk about this more in the lessons on intuition. But do you remember I said that when the Kundalini starts to grow, they start by laying the framework down first. From the root up to the ninth chakra. That framework gets laid down first. And it's actually possible for the soul to start downloading Akashic intuition quite early on, in tiny, tiny amounts. It's only in Kundalini awakening that goes to like 100% Akashic intuition. But through the journey of evolution of that soul, it can actually start to download bits and pieces, dribs and drabs of Akashic intuition. Now, this is very important when it comes to life plans, because the way I've described it is that the higher mind, this supercomputer, is calculating the future. It's calculating the life plan. It's calculating all the different permutations and possibilities in that life plan. And it's charting a course through that life plan, through all those possibilities, all those endless decisions to make. That's a calculation. That's not knowing the future. That's calculating the future. But as Akashic intuition grows very slowly over spiritual evolution, that starts to change, because the higher mind actually starts to download the future, which is part of Akashic intuition. So it starts moving towards no longer calculating the life plan, but downloading it from the source. Very slowly, very slow journey, this. Now, you could say this is actually a journey towards joining the flow of the infinite plan of the source. Instead of calculating the higher mind plan, it starts to download it, and it's very gradually joining that infinite akashic plan, predetermined infinite akashic plan of the source, until it gets to the goal, Kundalini awakening and self-realization. The universe realizes itself, and it's come home. It's reached, it knows itself, and this is when there is no more higher mind calculated life plan. It's come full circle. It's actually joined the flow, completely joined the flow of the infinite plan, and this is when you start to see things flowing in your life. So through the journey of self-realization, you will start to see things just start to flow. And it won't happen at the start because there is a negative cycle to go through. You might see little glimpses of it, but there's a negative cycle to go through, then there's a positive cycle to go through. But when that positive cycle starts, you'll start to see flow, and you'll start to see your life just changing course and everything happening as it should do. And that is joining the infinite plan of the source. You can ascertain yourself where somebody is in their spiritual evolution. That's very useful to do sometimes because it will answer some of your questions. Whether you think somebody's going through let's say a premature Kundalini awakening that's thrown them into emotional turmoil, for example, or whether somebody is not ready for that. Anyway, perhaps they might not have started their Kundalini growth journey. So you can look at people with your intuition and with your sight inside, not the third eye sight, let's call it, or in your mind's eye, you can see their Kundalini or whether there's no Kundalini there, and through that you can actually sort of figure out. And that's part of what we do in Network Healers as well. It's very important when somebody first comes along is to see where they're at in their spiritual evolution, because quite often some of the things we will suggest or the approaches we will take depend on that, and it can be very different. If somebody's going through Kundalini awakening, they need something completely different to somebody who is not, and it changes everything. It's just a matter of practicing. Now, every time you see somebody, try and practice and see where their Kundalini system is. It would, on the face of it, it would be very useful for them to know. However, I think with these regressions, it's very difficult to trust these regressions, unfortunately, because the thing is, what happens is they take people into their own lower mind subconscious, and the subconscious can throw out all sorts of stuff. So it's very difficult to be sure of what the information that is coming out that is accurate. And even if it's coming from higher mind information, that information usually has a twist to it, and quite often it's a metaphorical twist. And it can be, if you interpret it literally, it can be way off. So regressions, I think, are a very uncontrolled way of gaining information. They can be fascinating, and if they're interpreted right, perhaps, but I think that the field is it's so unregulated and so misunderstood that I think it's a bit tricky. Excellent. By the way, talking about assignments, the assignment for this lesson is a quiz. So there wasn't one for the previous lesson, but this lesson there's a reincarnation quiz to do. Yeah, quite possibly, and I would say premature Kundalini awakening in those cases. I would say when somebody has a Kundalini awakening and they're ready for it and it's at the right time, it can still cause a bit of turmoil, but it's not going to wreck your life. It's not going to wreck your life because it's all planned in a meticulous way by the higher mind. If somebody has a Kundalini awakening way too early, prematurely, let's say, then yeah, it can cause all sorts of emotional disturbances to quite severe levels, and especially if there's a Kundalini rupture, that can really mess with the whole psyche, basically. So yeah, that can send people into psychosis for sure. Yeah. Well, there is also the There are also probably, we should say, probably lots and lots of causes of psychosis as well. So they're probably not all Kundalini awakenings, um, but yeah, no, those films were, some of my favorite films when they first came out. And the whole it's funny how the Matrix has been sort of taken along and turned into a bit of a um, cult following, really, and it's sort of been brought into or molded into spirituality, hasn't it? Because it's this blue pill, red pill thing also it gets referred to and mixed in with the idea of Maya, the veil of illusion, because that is it's not the Matrix, but that's how the universe is constructed. There's a veil of illusion. So there's a link there. There's a metaphorical link. I mean, there's no aliens. There's no future beings, robots controlling everything. But the idea of taking a pill and then seeing the real reality around you, that's kind of a spiritual concept, isn't it? It's fascinating. Yeah. And by the way, another thing you mentioned there about meditation, I thought I should just follow up on. With meditation, uh, people, there's two things I should mention here. Quite often, people can get emotions come up from the past through meditation and breath work. People can get emotions coming up from the past, and usually that's quite a good thing. That's an integrative thing, and you're releasing blockages and getting rid of that past trauma. And quite often, when you release those blockages, it can activate some of the thoughts, some of the memories that went into causing those blockages, that trauma. So generally speaking, that's a good thing. However, in some cases, you have to be very careful. If there's a lot of trauma there, if there's a lot of serious trauma there, then you do have to be very careful, because it can actually unlock, like you said, unlock some memories that are not ready or not in a safe environment to be released. So somebody has to be in a proper safe environment and do it very gently and gradually, and know what they're doing, basically. So that can happen with meditation. So, but which is a slightly different issue to the whole premature Kundalini awakening thing.